Without the US Navy, there is no modern industrialized China. We are really looking at the end of the Chinese system. There are so many things that are so fragile and so broken. It's kind of an open contest as to what the proverbial bullet to the brain is going to be, because there are so many bullets in the air right now. In the last 2 weeks, the demographic data out of China has gone from horrible and unprecedented to something much darker. I haven't confirmed it yet, but that the number of kids entering kindergarten is less than half of what it was just since COVID. Degree of population collapse there is something that has never been recorded in any age. It's worse than what happened to the Jews of Europe during the Holocaust.
For China, that they are perhaps still seen as a growing power over the last 10 years, but that they're insulated from their poor geography by things like external circumstances and good internal governance. What would indicate the end of those external circumstances for China?
Well, deglobalization is a big piece of it. One of the reasons why the Chinese have been so successful since 1980 is because of their integration with the American-led economic order. The Americans provided the military overwatch that has allowed their corporate activities to span the world. Without the US Navy, there is no modern industrialized China. And there was an understanding of that a few years ago. And so the question was, how do we come to an understanding now that the Americans are finally getting done with the Middle East? But then COVID happened and Trump happened and deglobalization happened and populism happened, and the Biden administration is now actually more economically nationalist than Trump was. And no matter who wins in November, it's only going to get worse for the Chinese. You add their demographic issues on top of that, and we are really looking at the end of the Chinese system. And a bit like Europe, it's now, there are so many things that are so fragile and so broken. It's kind of an open contest as to what the proverbial bullet to the brain is going to be, because there are so many bullets in the air right now. Also, on top of that, since I spoke to you, in the last 2 weeks, the demographic data out of China has gone from horrible and unprecedented to something much darker. They're now, we haven't confirmed this yet. This is just in the last 2 weeks. I haven't confirmed it yet, but that the number of kids entering kindergarten is less than half of what it was just since COVID. And so just the degree of population collapse there is something that has never been recorded in any age. It's worse than what happened to the Jews of Europe during the Holocaust. It's just getting your mind around how dramatic the Chinese end is going to be and how soon it's going to be is difficult.
My understanding of your writing is that previous administrations in China had strong internal decision making, and
Very.
now we're seeing an evolution in that. What are you seeing as far as the decision making internally that is harming China's success?
So we've kind of been there and back again now. When Deng Xiaoping ended the Maoist era and opened the Chinese to the world, he was the man, and everything stopped with him. But this is a country that at the time had an economy that was, at most a fifth of what it is today. So if you're a relatively technologically backwards economy, you can have a single decision maker to push broad strategies because the options are relatively limited. You can do agriculture, you can do processing, you can do textiles. That's about it. And as the economy started to expand, he realized, he was wise enough, humble enough to realize that it wasn't a one-man job anymore. So what he did is he went out and he made connections to these two big factions, one in the north of the country, one in the south of the country. North one obviously around Beijing, the south one obviously around Shanghai, and set up a balance of power and selected two men specifically, Jiang Zemin from the south, Hu Jintao from the north, and had them basically build a system where for the next 20 years, the two factions would balance each other and take turns in the big chair. So we had 10 years under Jiang Zemin, we had 10 years under Hu Jintao. And in doing so, and by bringing in hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people who could operate at the local and province level, you got this broad-based committee-style approach to economic and political management. It wasn't perfect, but for the stage of development that China was going through, it was all about the growth, and it was about spreading out political power so that there weren't too many internal fights. And for 20 years that worked. But again, Ding was smart enough to know what he didn't know. And he could look forward 20 years and realize that he couldn't figure out what's next. He just, who knows what was going to happen with technology in China and the world in that environment. So the last task he gave the Hu faction and the Zhang faction before he stepped back and retired was the two of you have to jointly select who's next.
Hmm.
You have to elevate a candidate to succeed you. And the person they chose was absolutely the wrong person. And that's Xi Jinping, who's the guy now.
Hmm.
They chose him because he didn't have a faction. And they chose him because they thought he wasn't very smart and could be manipulated. And they were so very wrong. And so Xi Jinping has basically now purged these two broad economically and politically competent factions from the entire system completely. They're gone. It would be like if Trump and Biden were to jointly pick who the next president is, and then the next president would basically criminalize the Republican and Democratic Party and put them
Hmm.
all in camps. That's the scale of what's happened here.
Hmm.
And Xi, in doing so, has destroyed the old corporate committee style of governance and replaced it with Deng Xiaoping style one-man rule, but with a system that is vastly more complicated and far-reaching and something that no one person could ever control and command competently. And so the place has fallen apart.
Hmm.
And we're seeing decision-making collapses across the entire network because Xi has established himself as the sole decision maker, but made damn sure that there's no one in the bureaucracy who is capable, because that might be a potential threat to him. And he's destroyed the ability of younger generations to get into governance at all.
Hmm.
So it's just him, but there's no information flow. And he's making decisions alone in the dark based on whatever the status of the conversation of the voices in his head are, and completely oblivious to what's going on in the wider world. And so,
Hmm.
on top of all the other problems the Chinese are having, their government has stopped functioning.
So, Peter, then if China has lost these external circumstances that were so favorable, or is in the process of losing them, their internal decision making is getting worse. And even if that's totally off base, their demographic situation is catastrophic. What is the steelman argument, the best argument for the strength of China going forward?
That the United States is not serious when it says it wants to renationalize things, that it's not serious when it
Hmm.
says that it's afraid of China, and that it's going to pay trillions of dollars in order to defend China's corporate interests on a global basis, which ironically has been what most of the American business community has been betting on the last few years, and that's a bad bet.
Yeah. Thanks for watching that clip from my most recent interview with Peter Zeihan. To see the full episode, check out the box on the screen or the link in the description.